Avery Hale returns to the gray inlet range cache and finds the shelter burned to a husk. Embers whispering under crusted snow. Staff Sergeant Sniper Frostline kneels and lifts a single spent casing from the ash. A metal signature. A taunt resetting the mission. 4. Maybe 5 heavy boot tracks pull away with the northeast wind, pushing smoke into her mask at roughly 16 miles per hour. 12 rounds carried. Mk-22 MRAD in 308 with a fixed power optic and a detachable box magazine in a cold weather setup. She almost keys the radio for Sergeant First Class Nora Briggs. Then lets it ride. Invar. The enemy need not be the most skilled. They only have to make you hurry. She smooths a reflective layer under snow to smear heat. Fixes the valley lines in memory. Then rises. Her glove sticks on a charred beam. She moves. Avery Hale threads the narrows toward the higher perch, locals call North Knife. The inlet laid out below, and a contractor fire, trying to look like comfort. Staff Sergeant. Army Sniper. Call sign, Frostline. She spreads a reflective layer and brushes a skin of snow over it. Enough to blur heat. Not to disappear. The northeast wind saws through the pines at about 16 to 18 miles per hour, shoving spindrift across her boots. She notes a dead tree at 410 and a broken outcrop near 470, holding the landmarks in a quiet ledger. She keeps comms brief with Sergeant First Class Nora Briggs. June Archer's weather note says the crosswind is steady. Her Mk-22, MRAD in 308 rests easy. Fixed, power, optic, clear. Detachable box magazine, seated. For a second, she almost moves just to feel warm. Then she stays. Discipline means letting the natural world do the heavy lifting for you. Anger thins out, and calm takes its place. The ridge starts teaching. Flags twitch. Needles lean. Smoke pulls one way, then steadies. She chooses to dial for distance in her head and hold for wind with her patience. The mountain feels like a teammate. And she listens. Eli Brooks ladles hot liquor into dented cups in wind shadow of the winter camp. And the crew laughs loud at the memory of the burned cache. Greg Rouse sits apart, wiping carbon from a bolt and listening to the noise settle. He finally says a patient sniper goes for the spine, not the skin. And the laughter thins. A plan forms anyway. Sweep at first light. 6 on the stack. Staggered spacing. Rear security. Follow anything that points west. Cal Parker tries a grin, and it slips when the canvas wall snaps hard in the gust. Dane Collier pokes at the map with a glove and warps the paper. Pete Dalton stares at steam, lifting from his cup like he could read it. The small talk misses every target. The fire paints their faces brave and makes liars of them. A crowd fears being left alone. A marksman only needs to open a gap in the middle. Greg sets his rifle down and flexes a cramped hand. Someone refills the cups and then thinks better of it. Pre-dawn. Avery Hale lays a soft retreat angling west. A ribbon of disturbed snow that carries a cheap canteen as if it belonged there. The gray inlet range is all breath and scrape. Northeast wind hardening to 16, maybe 18 miles per hour, drawing spindrift into the track until it looks half erased already. Staff Sergeant, Army Sniper, call sign Frostline. She climbs toward the perch she chose the night before and settles into the pocket where rock cuts the gust. Her Mk-22 MRAD in 308 rests close. Fixed power optic clear. Detachable box magazine seated. Cold weather setup, doing its quiet job without ceremony. She checks her glove when the seam bites at a knuckle. Annoyed at the sting. Then forgets it. The valley holds its shoulders high and waits. At 6:47 a.m., the patrol arrives at the burned shelter. 6 figures in cautious motion that looks practiced until it starts to bunch. They spread in a staggered spacing, with rear security glancing over a hunched shoulder, then drift tighter as the bait pulls, excitement shrinking the gaps. Frostline watches visibility pulse through veils of snow. 400 yards becomes 415. Then back again. The middle position moves like he is used to being heard. She reads a slight quartering shove inside the bigger push and lets her breathing find the flat spots between gusts. The man in the middle leans to the canteen. He is not careful with it. He is curious. She releases one round and keeps the follow-up on a leash. The valley refuses to echo in a helpful way. The patrol fractures into panic angles and misreads. Some sprinting toward trees. Some sinking straight down as if the snow could carry them. Spindrift begins to pour into boot prints, stitching up the morning even as it is being written. Frostline stays in place for an hour that feels longer than it is, marking who takes charge and who freezes, who moves like a problem and who shakes like a warning bell. She does not transmit to Sergeant First Class Nora Briggs, yet. Fire many shots and you tell them where you are. Fire one and you tell them who is in charge. The canteen lies half-rhymed where he dropped it. Nothing but tin. Yet it becomes the hinge of the day. She lets fear do what noise never could. Eli Brooks drops as if a string snapped, and the patrol breaks open. Dane Collier bolts for the tree line, choosing speed over cover and turning himself into a beacon on white ground. Cal Parker stumbles. Glove, skidding, fingers fumbling at nothing, while panic thrums in his hands. Pete Dalton vanishes between black trunks, then shouts and is swallowed again by drifting snow. Two men grab Eli by the shoulders and drag, boots smearing their own spacing until staggered becomes clump. Frostline does not move. Staff Sergeant Avery Hale keeps the rifle quiet and the valley quieter. The northeast wind rubs at 16, sanding the scene. She nearly shifts to see better. She stops. Silence is working harder than any follow-up. Back at the winter camp, Greg Rouse hears the single crack roll laid over the ridge and moves without ceremony. Red 3. Quick and clean. Then he cuts the net and anchors the crew before it spirals. Break contact to the east. Rear security eyes up. He says it like weather. And that calm is what takes. On the slope below, blood turns dark against snow, while gloves slip and reset. A radio presses tight to a jawline. Frost flaking off plastic. The remaining men wrestle Eli toward a line of trees with sloppy urgency, afraid to look anywhere except forward. The ridge looks like a blank face watching all of it. Fear replaces the hunt as the truth lands. They are not chasing anyone. They are being herded by something they cannot see. When a formation collapses from an arrow to a circle, someone else is holding the bow. Frostline stays motionless in overwatch. She does not fire again. The snow begins to stitch shut the wound. Her knee aches once, then queets under routine. Avery Hale settles deeper into the hide and lets the second shot die before it is even born. Spindrift starts to sand over every print. The northeast wind works like a file and she lets it. Through the Mk-22 MRAD's fixed glass, she studies aftermath, not targets. Cal Parker's hands tremble. Dane Collier sprints 2 steps. Stalls. Repeats. One of the others finally looks for angles instead of warmth, which earns a quiet mark in her head. Back at the winter camp, Greg Rouse keeps his voice even and short. No chase. Fortify. 2-hour watch. Radio stays to brief checks. The canvas lowers to coals, and the crew obeys, because steadiness is contagious when fear is noisy. Avery notes how the guard's headlamp sweeps past an opening and never comes back. She blinks, and it breaks. Birds return to the tree line in 3s. She uses them like living sensors, not omens. Movement drops. Nerves do not. She logs who is dangerous and who is brittle. then tucks the list behind her breath. The report to Sergeant First Class Nora Briggs can wait until the hill has finished speaking. Patience is a quiet kind of force. It does not raise its voice. It bends confidence until it cracks. Snow hushes the slope and steals excuses today. Waiting becomes the tactic, not a delay. Control slides to whoever can hold one steady breath longer than the shouting can last. Late afternoon lays a thinner light across the gray inlet range. The northeast wind eases to 14. Flares. Then settles again. And Avery Hale feels the air lift a fraction off her skin. That tiny rise will flatten and arc a hair. She recounts ammunition at 23 and leaves the rest in a cache to keep weight down. She shifts 200 yards west. Not far. Just enough to cut any straight line an observer might draw from the morning's echo. Staff Sergeant. Army Sniper. Call sign Frostline. The Mk-22 MRAD in 308 sits quiet beside her. Fixed, power, optic, clear. Detachable box, magazine, seated. Cold weather setup, doing the boring part well. A seam inside her glove rubs and she almost tugs it off. Then lets it be. June Archer's weather burst rides in with stable pressure and a likely helicopter window late morning tomorrow. Avery chooses to dial elevation and hold for wind in principle, then keeps a flexible mind for quartering gusts. She breathes to a cadence that belongs more to the ridge than to her. A small agreement between bones and granite. Down in camp, Greg Rouse leans on a 2-hour guard rotation and cancels any talk of a chase. His steadiness hangs in the tents like a weight. Cal Parker ages a year in one evening and wears it in his shoulders. Dane Collier watches the North Knife ridgeline as if it might return the favor. The wind toys with signs. A frayed tarp corner ticks like a metronome. Treetops bow. Stop. Bow again. Spindrift peels off a shelf of rock and reignits the air in a slow sheet. Avery updates a hand-drawn range sketch with a short arrow for quartering drift. Then rests the pencil. Comms with Sergeant First Class Nora Briggs stay brief. No drama. No speeches. The outside wind is calming. The inside wind is not. She decides the message must sharpen overnight without another shot. The wind teaches in traces. You do not see it. You only see what it moves. The real math is not on metal. It is on people. And tonight the equation tilts toward the one willing to be still. Avery Hale spends the hard night bargaining with temperature inside a shallow cradle she scoops from drifted snow. Pins of cold find fingertips. The left knee argues and then settles when she breathes slower than habit. Staff Sergeant, Army Sniper. Call sign Frostline. The Mk-22 MRAD in 308 rests in its wrap. Fixed optic, clear enough. Detachable box magazine, seated. No drama. She watches the inlet's dark vein curl under crusted ice and sets herself near the camp's water route. Far enough to be a rumor and close enough to witness routine. The northeast wind slides and lifts in patchy slabs. Visibility smears near the waterline and then sharpens again like glass wiped with a sleeve. Before dawn, she tracks who wakes first, by sound and by careless light. At 7:15 a.m., 2 contractors step out with empty containers. Their silhouettes shrink against the white field. Small and alone. For a second, she almost takes the easy proof. Then she lets it pass. The pair crosses open ground. Shoulders, hunched. Returns with slosh and relief. Habit begins to root. That is the point. A brief burst arrives from June Archer about stable pressure. Chief Warrant Officer Mark Delaney pushes an icing watch for the helicopter and holds for a window tomorrow. Frostline rewinds the reflective layer under a thin skin of snow. Blurring heat enough to be uninteresting. No magic. Only management. She eats a reluctant mouthful and tastes metal. The sensation makes her laugh once, quiet and short. A glove seam worries a knuckle until she shifts it a fraction. The knee flares again and then calms when she resets the angle. Sometimes restraint is the prettier bait. Mercy draws them where noise never will. She inches to a better view and lets the quiet do what she cannot. The river keeps moving beneath ice. The camp keeps pretending the morning belongs to them. She writes their patterns on memory and leaves the page open. Wind loosens for a breath, then firms. She files note for Nora Briggs in head and saves it. Tomorrow needs patience more than thunder. And she has it. Third dawn opens thin over the gray inlet range. And Avery Hale commits to a closer hide cut into crusted snow along a low ledge. The choice steals her exit routes but buys detail. From here, she can read stitching on canvas. See the ash rings where last night's fire pretended to be courage. Staff Sergeant. Army Sniper. Call sign Frostline. The MK-22 MRAD in 308 lies steady. Fixed power optic clear. Detachable box magazine seated. Cold weather setup humming along like an old generator. She lets the ridge press against her ribs and settles the ache in her knee with a slower breath. In the contractor camp, Greg Rouse pushes back against fatigue and keeps order with economy. He rotates the watch, checks faces, keeps talk level. Cal Parker tries a joke that does not stick. Dane Collier watches the North Knife Ridgeline as if it might blink. Pete Dalton sits quiet after being found the day before. Hands tucked, eyes raw. June Archer's weather note rides in as a brief line about stable pressure and a possible window. The northeast wind shifts faintly into a quartering push. Flags hesitate, then point a little off true. Avery reads the change and decides the morning does not need a shot to finish the message already written. Power is moving from the barrel to the calendar. Near 10:40 a.m. Broken cloud thins, and a UH-60 Black Hawk, driven by Chief Warrant Officer Mark Delaney, comes in above the inlet. Icing. Watch still on. Frostline follows it only long enough to confirm what she already knew. The mission is terrain denial. Not a list of bodies. The reticle drops. The frame fills with sky and rotor disc. On the ground, a windsock lists as the breeze leans quartering. Contractors begin to load gear and a bagged body. A gloved hand fights a stubborn zipper, then wins. Another hand fumbles a strap, then corrects it with a small, angry shake. For a second, Avery shifts to relieve a cold bite along her hip. She goes back still. The rotor's pull steals sound from the camp and carries it across the water like thread. You do not need a storm to move a ship. Take away the lighthouse, and it will steer into the dark on its own. She stays low until the aircraft lifts and turns east. Fear rides out beside them. Strapped in with the cargo, she extracts cleanly, careful and unhurried, noting that silence and absence have achieved what more violence would only complicate. She gives Sergeant First Class Nora Briggs a silent check in her head and keeps the radio dark a little longer. June Archer's barometer line holds steady. The ridge feels lighter once the rotor fades. Frostline maps 2 exit lanes, then chooses the colder one and lets the inlet fall behind. The helicopter's thump fades, and the inlet takes its sound back. Avery Hale walks into the abandoned contractor camp like stepping into a room after a storm. Cautious but unhurried. Tent sag. Guy lines. Hum. Ash curls in weak wind. She takes only what helps movement. 2 cans of meat. A sleeve of crackers. A handful of 7.62. She cannot fire but can trade. The MK-22 MRAD in 308 rides her shoulder. Mentioned by weight more than by promise. In a corner tent she finds a photo. A blue house behind a family with summer eyes. Half singed at the edge. She pockets it without a reason she cares to examine. A stove rattles, as if annoyed. She almost startles, then lets her shoulders drop. The place smells like heat that lost the argument. She decides to burn the rest. Not for tactics, but for a period at the end of the line. Canvas folds in on itself. Zippers melt. Soot prints the heel of her glove when she zips her pack. A radio check to Sergeant First Class Nora Briggs is brief and clean. Received and logged. An LED blinking once in the cold light. Chief Warrant Officer Mark Delaney and the Black Hawk are already a memory over the ridge. Triumph does not arrive loud. It arrives as normal breathing that finally obeys. In a world that loves noise, most victories whisper. Avery leaves before the fire finishes, because this is not a monument. It is the end of a small story, and she will not drag it behind her. Snow carries the ash sideways. A tent gives up and lies flat. She turns north and lets the camp shrink to the size it deserves. Avery Hale leaves the gray inlet range without looking back. Letting snow rewrite the morning. 23 rounds accounted for. Rifle clean. Radio log clear. She turns toward colder ground, where the map thins. The MK-22 MRAD rides light on her shoulder. Mentioned and forgotten. She files a brief receipt to Sergeant First Class Nora Briggs. Pockets the silence. Keeps moving. Closure arrives as the decision to continue. Not to celebrate. On snow, every footprint fades. What stays is the way we walk. She chooses distance over noise.